Hey everybody, welcome to RAM Chat. I'm Erin Crew. I'm here with Colleen Zasowski, our school board president, and we're turning this into board table talk this week. And with us today, we have Jim Fink, our CFO. And Jim, this is your first time on any of our shows at all. So welcome.
I was on a podcast once, I think, but that was a while ago.
That's true. You were on the podcast for food services.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Yep. That was fun.
You were right. I was wrong. Mark that down, date and time.
I'm keeping score.
So Colleen, let's start by talking about our school board meetings this month. We had a lot of activity happening at both of our meetings. And I want to start with a recap from our action meeting and talking about the summer RAMs program that Dr. Murray, our Director of Curriculum Instruction, is rolling out this summer.
Yeah, so Dr. Murray had done a presentation in the Curriculum and Technology Committee meeting proposing a plan to address learning loss, which has happened this past year with everything that's gone on with COVID and the alternative learning methods that we had put, learning models that we had put into place. So Kelly, Dr. Murray's department, and Dr. Murray worked really hard to come up with a strategy to address that learning loss and hope to bring some of the students that have suffered from that learning loss up to par as best as possible, and provide these services in math and reading that will hopefully, capture some of that and get them ready for the next school year. So there are going to be, I believe, 3 different 2-week sessions, and that is the plan right now. And it will be based on having staff available. That's going to be a key factor in that, which we heard again last night when Dr. Murray brought her presentation that had been given in the committee to the full board. So she brought that last night to the full board, talked about how she would like to structure it. As I said, emphasize that staffing will be something to really keep our eye on and get a pulse on to make sure that we can adequately service those students that do sign up for this program. One of the concerns that the board members had brought up in the committee meeting and reiterated again last night was about the outreach of the summer program to the families in our district that would benefit from this opportunity. And Dr. Murray, I believe, is doing a good job there in getting communication, focusing on communication and sharing this program out so that our students have access to, I wouldn't say apply for it, but get an assessment to see if it's something that would help them. And so our families will be informed of that, and our teachers will be able also to share that out with students that they identify may benefit from this program also. So we're excited that Springford's going to be able to offer some kind of programming to help address that learning loss and close the gap on what's taken place and help us as we move forward next year also.
And we did send multiple times a few weeks ago the interest survey to parents. We will be making sort of the more formal official announcement this week with just basic information. There's not going to be any sign up information out yet, but there will be the announcement of the summer RAMs program coming out this week. And actually, we usually have the Cool School program run during the summer, and we're really changing focus this year. We're not going to run Cool School. Instead, we will have the summer RAMs program that will really focus on learning more so than the fun sort of like arts and craftsy type activities that we had with Cool School. So we'll start to see that information coming out. It'll be an email, but I understand that's not enough. So we'll do messenger pigeon and skywriting with somebody has an airplane nearby, I'm sure.
You have all those avenues, Erin. So I am sure that when Dr. Murray said last night, the next focus is really on communicating this out. I am certain and completely confident that you will do exactly that. And I also understand about the Cool School too, is that there has been steadily declining enrollment with that. And with that not happening at all last year because of COVID, this is an opportunity for us to announce a new program that does specifically focus on the learning, specifically in the areas of math and reading. So it's the right time for it. And I think that our students, families, and even our teachers next year will benefit from having our students participate in that opportunity.
And then also last night, the board voted on a method of instruction for next school year. We will be returning to school in person 5 days a week with the cyber option for families who would like to remain home, which is excellent to hear. We're all really happy to be able to take that one big step back to more of a normal school year that we're all used to. And
so that summer RAMs program will support us as we go back into somewhat of a more normal method of instruction with the 5 days in, no asynchronous Wednesdays, and also the option for the Springford Cyber learning, which I know you've had a focus on communicating that out as well for that opportunity for cyber through Springford specifically. So yeah, we're super excited that that went through last night. It was a 9-0 vote. Everybody is on board and is ready to go forward with that. And even from a board perspective, we're also moving our meetings back to the format that they typically have been, where we will meet as a board on the 3rd and 4th Mondays of the month. Again, another step towards a return to normal, with taking with us everything that we've learned during COVID. So very, very happy about that. Yeah. And the feedback has been wonderful for that.
Yeah. Two pretty important steps that came out with the summer RAMs and then the return to school next year. There was also something else pretty big that happened last night, and I'm going to read it verbatim because there was a lot of discussion. The board voted to proceed forward in moving Mr. Rizzo from acting superintendent to the superintendent role. Now this means that our solicitor's office, Fox Rothschild, will begin preparing employment contracts for Mr. Rizzo to prepare the necessary documentation for the election of Mr. Rizzo to fill the role as the next superintendent of schools at a subsequent school board meeting. So we're moving towards having Mr. Rizzo take that seat. He's not quite there yet, but this is very exciting. If I had the balloon emojis, I would make them with that announcement emoji thing.
I did that last night for you. Didn't I do that last night for you? Clearly, look, I have probably more interaction than the other board members just because of the nature of my position there. I have more interaction with Mr. Rizzo than the others. I think he has excelled. Not only we saw a little bit of that in the beginning, but then we went right into COVID, right? But he's excelled during a crisis. So if we have what we need, and we have someone that can right the ship and lead us forward during a crisis situation, what is it that we're looking for? Why waste everyone's time at the IU? Why get other candidates excited that they have an opportunity? Why should the board spend all of that time when we have what we need right here? The man is invested in our community. He has children in the district, not going anywhere, so he has an investment. But aside from his leadership during a crisis, his investment, my biggest caveat to this is that I do not want Springford to have to take a hiatus or a step back, because when you hire anybody, no matter how great they are, there is a learning curve. We already have that. We can continue to go forward. So I've been an advocate of this for some time, but was willing to go through the process if that's what the board had wanted to do. And then the board, there was a shift, and the board seemed to think, yeah, you know, what are we doing here? We have what we want, we have what we need, it's time to move forward. So with that, yes, I was ready to just skip over the procedural pieces and move right forward. But you know, that's who I am, and I was excited that the board had come around to where maybe I was already there. Maybe I had gotten there first just because I have more interaction in the position that I'm in. But yeah, I'm excited that we're moving forward with that. And I think he will be great for our district.
Mhm.
So
yeah, absolutely. And now we're going to just cross the T's, dot the I's and the J's, and we'll
right.
get going. So we'll be looking for more official announcements at an upcoming school board meeting when the board actually votes, if that's a decision to move him to that role. So good moves happening last night at our school board action meeting.
Lots of activity last night. Lots of activity.
Yep. A lot that happened. And I don't want to miss one other large chunk of information that came out of this month's meeting. The board voted to adopt the proposed final budget. Is that right, Jim?
I was actually at the last work session meeting. So not last night, but the meeting prior.
Earlier this month. Yep.
Correct.
So the board voted to approve the proposed final budget for 21-22 school year in the amount of just shy $180 million. I don't know what $180 million looks like. So when I hear $180 million, I think, oh, that's a really big number. I'm glad we have
a lot of zeros behind it.
Glad we have a CFO who understands what that means.
Yeah.
So we thought it would be good for this episode, since we are in this period right now where we have the budget available for public inspection for 20 days.
Just about ready for that. Yeah, we're waiting for one thing from the state before we can publish that, but that'll be due and up on the website by the 4th of May.
Excellent. So we thought this would be a good time to sort of do a budget 101, because I think most people in our community hear $180 million and that Waka sound from Peanuts goes through one ear and goes out the other, because it's a big number and a lot of us deal with much smaller budgets. So let's talk to Jim. What the heck is a school budget?
Well,
what's a property tax? What's an expenditure? So we have some questions written out to have our expert here bring $180 million down to an amount that we can all digest.
How much was that?
$180 million.
You said $100 million $80.
No, she did.
I didn't.
You might want to edit that.
$180 million.
That's the one.
Yeah.
It sounds actually kind of small when you think about all the money the federal government's been flying around, but you're right. $180 million is a big
sounds
number.
like a lot.
Yeah, it's a big number.
So, Jim, we have some questions written down here. And let's start with, where are we right now? So we're talking about a proposed final budget. We're talking about a public inspection for a certain period of time. And when I send out board notes this month, we'll have sort of that timeline in there about what happens in the budget process. But we're talking about a proposed final budget. And last month we weren't.
That's what we had last month. So where we are right now is we have to follow along the state rules of Act 1, which was passed in 2006, which laid out the groundwork of how this process goes. Some of it seems more like check boxes along the way, and some of it's really where the hard work is done. So what we did earlier this month was I gave a presentation on at the work session meeting 2 weeks ago, where I went through all of those numbers in the budget, where we were, what the difference of a gap would, and what a potential tax impact would be of that gap between revenues and expenses. That at that meeting we discussed, we were at about a 3.5% gap. That would be what the tax implications would be. However, Act 1 also says that there's an index percentage that I am not allowed to go over. The district is not allowed to go over. That index number this year changes every year, but that index number this year is 3%. So the state is saying, unless you have something crazy going on, or unless you go back to the taxpayers for more in a referendum, which would have to take place at the primary on the 18th. We're not doing that. You cannot increase your budget or your tax implications of that budget by more than 3%. So we went in earlier this month to the board, presented 3.5%. So we know right off the bat we have to get 0.5% off of that thing. Mr. DeBello last evening went through what we talked about at the Finance Committee meeting earlier in the month of a strategy where we would get that budget down to a 3% tax increase. So that's where we land right now. The process from here goes to, we will make the proposed final budget, which shows the 3.5%, because that's what the board adopted. We will make that public by May the 4th for public inspection. It'll be up on our website, or if you want a hard copy, you can come in and request a hard copy and we'll give it to you to be inspected on site. From there, we will advertise the board's intent to adopt a final budget 10 days before the May, what's the date of the next one, 24th? May 24th board meeting.
May 10th is a work session.
Correct. And the 24th, I think, is when the voting meeting is. So on May 24th, we will presumably vote to adopt a final budget. I have to, my department needs to advertise that 10 days before that vote, so public has an opportunity to go and read it and to be involved in the discussion at that board meeting. And then, according to our calendar, we'll have adopted the final budget, and then we can start going through and doing the tax bills and all that other crazy stuff that happens and has to be out by July the 1st.
So that is a good review of where we are, and it's sort of an overhead look at the budgeting process. And we do have some other questions. So a lot of times we'll hear about our millage rate. What's a mill?
A millage rate is, or the rate itself is really more of a percent that is calculated against the assessment of a property owner's property. Property owner's property is, I don't want to say, it's typically approximately, Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong on this as a realtor specialist, it's around 50% of what the market value of your property is.
Typically, that's what you see as an assessment.
Yes.
And then you see it's typically in and around half of what the actual property value is.
It's a bit complex. The state comes up with something called the common level ratio. I'm not going to bore you with all that, but that's how the assessment is calculated against what a market value is. So, but typically what's interesting there is, and I think where a lot of confusion comes about, is assessments don't change year over year over year. I live in the district. My assessment has been the same since I moved into that home back in 2005. It hasn't changed. So when we talk about things like tax increases, it's very interesting because the millage rate, as you brought up earlier, Erin, is an amount that is multiplied against that assessment rate to come up with whatever the tax bill amount is, right? So what's interesting about that tax versus an income tax is the base never changes in a property tax unless you've added onto your house or something along, put a pool in or something, then it would get reassessed for that piece that you changed. But the interesting thing about property taxes, because that base assessment never changes, the only way to have more revenue come from the area is to increase the tax rate, because you're never changing the base, as opposed to an income tax, where very rarely do we change the tax rate, but the base, which is a person's wages, does increase typically year. So what's interesting to me is if on average a person's income increases by about 3% a year or so, depending on what industry and all that stuff that you work in, your taxes actually do go up every year, but it gets overlooked because the rate hasn't changed. Property tax works the opposite way. So we talk about tax increases at the property tax level, at the school district level, as an increase. And I understand nobody likes to see their taxes increased, but the understanding there is that because the base never changes, so the multiplier needs to change. That's the only difference. If I have a 3% raise in my wages, automatically in the state where the income tax rate is 3.07%, I'm automatically paying 3% more in my taxes. Does that make sense? So this past year, I would have paid 3% more in my income taxes to the state. From a property tax percentage, unless that rate changes, I would have paid the same thing year over year over year. We know our our expenditure rate in the district increases around 3 to 4% every year. So somehow we have to keep up with that. So if the base isn't changing, the rate has to change to cover, to make up for those expenditures. Did I confuse everybody?
Well, Colleen's an expert in property taxes.
She is.
And that was one of our questions that we really went into there is how does the property tax work? And that really helps for, I think, people to understand those differences and
Yes.
what that money is applied.
There's a couple ways to look at that too. Is the only way to really get organic property tax to increase is to increase property within the school district. We do see that. We see developments and those types of things. And those do add more property tax dollars to our revenue line. They also add more expenses because we're also bringing in more students and our population goes up. We have a spend per student.
So there's a trade-off there.
Yeah, so there is some trade-off there. And I know some folks, well, we have all this huge development coming in. It's gonna be able to keep our tax rates low because we're gonna get more. But there's an expense line that also has to be thought about as well. That's why I'm here, to think about all of those different things and all those different levels and balance it all out.
I'm just going to go back to one other thing too. Earlier this year, and I believe that Tom DeBello and Joe Cerisi had started this a couple years ago, where they would meet just once a year with the municipalities to talk about the growth and development in the communities that feed our district. We had that meeting on Zoom because of COVID, obviously, a few months ago, and there were, lots of updates given of what's happening in the different townships and boroughs and the developments that are happening. But Jim, you're very correct when you say, yes, with that revenue comes expenses, because you're talking about students. And when you're looking at some of these housing developments where they're very large homes, they can have 3, 4, 5 students. It's not unheard of at all. So there is a balance there. While there is some revenue that comes in, definitely there are expenses to the district. And that is the way that shakes. There's been so many conversations for as long as I've been on the board, and I'm sure prior, about property tax reform. It's similar, I believe, to charter reform. There are lots and lots of conversations where there is no resolution. And so we have to work within the guidelines that have been established for us. Am I an advocate of an increase? I think I've said it loud and clearly for a long time. I am not an advocate of an increase during a pandemic. But then what do you do? What do you do? So I will tell you, I did ask that question to the other area school board presidents as we've continued to meet on a monthly basis as opposed to a biweekly basis when we were in the throes of COVID. We're now meeting monthly, and that question, I did pose that question to the other board presidents in some of our neighboring districts. Not all, but some of them are not doing an increase, and they're taking their monies that are needed from the capital fund. So what does that do then? I know what that does, but Jim, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the impact of that onto the future of the district?
Sure.
It's like you're reading. It's like you're reading our notes, because that was.
I'm not, and I didn't even have access to those, and I always like to believe you.
I know. I just have them scrapped down on a piece of paper.
Wow,
that is the next question. What's a fund balance?
What a segue! What a segue, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about that, and that'll be.
Yeah. So a fund balance, and one statement I'm going to correct Colleen is they would not be using their capital reserve,
right.
because that's a different type of thing simply for capital expenditures. What they're going to use is their unassigned fund balance to cover any differences. So what is an unassigned fund balance? Well, it's like your savings account. So what they're going to do is they're going to take money out of their savings account to pay for normal operating expenses. I'm of the opinion financially that is not a great idea. That's me. I understand the reason why they want to do it, especially in this case with hopefully we're at the tail end of a pandemic, but still there's stuff going on. There's a lot of businesses that are not operating at full capacity, if at all. So I understand why they're doing it. The issue comes down to is, as I said before, your expenditures or our expenditures here at Springford increase around 3 to 4% every year. In order to make up that, once you want to get back on track with not using your fund balances, your tax increase will be at least twice what you thought it would be when you want to correct the issue. What we know is when you, and we had these discussions last year in our budget conferences there with the board or in finance committee, was once you push something off that's ongoing, you have twice the impact the following year to bring it back up. Why? Because I'm cutting, say it's $1 million, I'm going to cut $1 million out of my operating budget, right? For something that I know I need to do. So next year I have to put that $1 million back in, and I have to make up for the $1 million that I took out. So now instead of a $1 million, it's a $2 million. So it's a double-fold problem. Eventually, if you keep going back to your fund balance, what happens to your savings account? It runs down till there's either nothing left or to an unsustainable level if there are emergencies that happen along the way. When I say emergencies, I'm thinking like maybe something big capital or something like that, where we just need liquid funds at a moment's notice. That's, I believe, what the other districts in the area are thinking about doing. And I know some districts have done that for the past number of years. And really
not all. It's not all. I mean, I've heard that there are some discussions
yes.
that.
No, it's definitely not all.
And
I know that. Yeah.
Right. And I wouldn't specifically name any either. I'm just saying that I've heard that we're
still early in that process. So anything can happen at any of those school districts, including ours. We're not done yet. So yeah, you're right. It may be what they're talking about now and what their boards are considering. However, it could change.
And could you also do this for us, Jim? And I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much, Erin, or maybe this question isn't on there.
You never know. Maybe you're reading her mind again.
Maybe I am. But, there have been a lot of people that have reached out saying, well, the kids weren't in the buildings, so you saved all of this money. Now, I know that that's not true, but could you talk to our audience a little bit about that? Because not only did it end up being that we still had a number of expenditures, building related, et cetera, but there were other expenditures that were added during this year that I'm aware of too, but maybe you can talk with more clarity than I can about those, because there was not a terrific savings this year. In fact, we probably spent more money. We escalated and expedited, I should say, different the technology piece. And yes, the grant money will cover a lot of that, but not all of it, and we don't have it yet, all of it. So
correct. So yeah, and that's a great question. I've heard that one as well numerous times. I heard it on the radio, which was interesting to me as I'm driving to work in the morning. So, and I'm sitting there yelling at the radio, going, "That's not true. That's not true." And I live it, so I know. Yeah, there's always expenditures that go on. When we, people think, I think because there was a time where students weren't in our buildings that we're just going dark. We're not going dark. We're keeping our facilities up. We still have salaries to pay for folks who are keeping our buildings running and in working order, which you always need to do. You're not turning your lights off. And to be honest with you, electricity is a very small piece of our $180 million budget. The biggest piece of our
we've gone green too in recent years.
Absolutely. So yeah, so that's helped bring that down. In the short and long term scenarios, we have to continue to heat and cool our buildings. If we don't cool our buildings, we get mold. If we don't heat our buildings, we burst pipes, right? So those types of things all have to happen. Plus, we need to keep everything clean, COVID clean and all that good stuff. We went through only a very brief time when there were no students in our buildings, by the way. We started bringing students back in our building in the middle of September. So as soon as you have one small group of students come in the buildings, you're back to pretty much to operation. You have to keep everything clean, plus all the touch areas and all that Mr. Hunter and his crew are dealing with. So there's still all of those expenditures still going on, even when we have a limited number of students in our buildings. 80% of our budget, Colleen, is personnel. Those folks did not stop working. Our teaching staff was teaching. They may not have been doing it all in our buildings to start with, but they were in our buildings come, Erin, I'm gonna forget the date, but some point in mid-October, I think, where we had some in early, but we had everybody in by mid-October, I think it was. I forget what the actual date was, but it was something.
I want to say October 24th, but that
sounds familiar, but it was close.
It's wrong. Okay. That's a Saturday. I have no idea.
I'm going with the 27th, but that's where I'm at.
I'm going with the 19th. Was it the
24th was homecoming?
Are we really going to haggle over this? Is this what we're going to do? So many things to haggle over. But also in that time, we were still busing students. We were still busing non-public students. The board voted on continuing that route. So
we did,
and we have to keep up our grounds. We have to keep up all of these things. I'm sure nobody saw any of our grass go to seed or anything like that. We're keeping up with all of those things. So to say just because students were in our buildings that we had zero expenses is it's just simply it's a simplified way to look at it, and it's simply not correct.
Right. So I thank you for doing that. But you're right. The board did vote to continue with even the non-pub transportation. And of course, we wanted our buildings and our grounds maintained, because it was always the intention that we needed to move back to some brick and mortar, which we did over time. Took a little bit of time, but you're right. And also when you were mentioning about Mr. Hunter and the cleaning, the cleaning efforts were by far, oh my gosh, they were quadrupled with what needed to be done because of COVID protocols and creating an environment where we could bring the teachers and the faculty and the kids back in safely. So,
well, as Mr. DeBello pointed out last night in his report, we did see year to date, we have seen some savings in our cleaning simply because over the summer and such, we were able to do cleaning with our own staff instead of bringing in the swarm, I call it the swarm, the outside contractors who come in to help do that swarm type of cleaning over the summer. We were able to get a lot of the cleaning stuff done in the spring when there was no one in the buildings, and then let that continue through the summer. But one thing we've seen increase exponentially is our charter school costs. So those have already offset each other. In fact, if I include the savings we've seen from busing from the beginning of the year and ESY, and the combined with the savings and some of the cleaning from the contracting cleaning, the charter school increases have wiped that out.
Surely. And as I mentioned, there have been countless conversations about charter reform, as there has been about property tax reform, and both of those subjects seem to continue to get lots of debate and interest, and they fall flat there.
Yeah, not a lot of movement.
Not a lot of movement. Nothing trickles down to us that we can act on. It's not that we are happy with that. Many of us on the board have gone to Harrisburg repeatedly to fight for on both of those fronts for a fair funding formula, and doesn't happen. So. That's
true. And I think what's also interesting is with our own cyber school and development that we have done, we are looking to compete with them head on.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of the coin.
And we'll do a quick plug for
so important for that.
A quick plug for our Springford Cyber Learning. We just opened new student enrollment. So if families are interested in enrolling in Springford Cyber for next school year, 21-22, that enrollment process is open, and we're having a new family open house on Wednesday, the 28th. And we have quite a few people already registered. So we're hoping to be able to bring families back into Springford, maybe somebody who stepped away, because that asynchronous flexible schedule is what works best for them. Bring them back into Springford, have them do our program. People move here because of the school district, and we want them to stay with us because we want them to be part of the Springford family. So we're hoping to be able to sort of encourage people to come on back and give us a try again to take part in our cyber program.
I would
That
agree. And
advertisement, yeah, go ahead.
And I think that that is definitely a big draw, I think, for families to bring their kids back into Springford, which is obviously a high performing state, if not national, school system. In addition to that, to me, the kicker is, guess what? You get to participate in all our extracurricular activities, band, sports, clubs, all of that good stuff. You, as a cyber student, the student will get to participate in all of those things, which unfortunately with an outside cyber or brick and mortar charter, they're not permitted to do so.
I live in a neighboring district and was talking to a next door neighbor whose child is really, really thriving in the virtual environment because of their not extracurricular activities, but their own sort of hobbies that take place outside of the school day. They're able to get to their location where they go after school earlier, and really it's at the stage in the life that her child is in, probably going to be a potential career move for them eventually. So with virtual for them, it's been perfect because they're able to get to that next place sooner. And I said to them, well, why don't you do cyber next? The district I live in isn't offering a cyber program the way that we are. And it's important to this family to remain with the district. And that's a disappointment for them. There's an opportunity to continue that growth outside of school that they'll be missing out on because our district just doesn't have the same program that we have here at Springford.
The district where you live, right?
Yeah. Not to throw my district under the bus, I won't say.
No, that's fine. I don't want any confusion
but,
between when you say our district, you mean
my
the
home
district
where I reside and all of my tax dollars go, which Jim and I have talked about, and that's a whole other debacle.
The communication about the cyber open house has been circulating, and I think it is getting some traction. I've heard some positive feedback about that. So yeah, it's happening. So very excited.
Well, and Jim and I have talked a lot about this. It's difficult because cyber schools are businesses. They are profit organizations. They're not a school the way that we know a school. So they have marketing budgets that can pay for television ads and radio ads. And we are competing with, in some cases, multi-million-dollar businesses to get our own students to come back in. So our more grassroots marketing style, we're not doing the radio ads. One, because the footprint is entirely different, but two, because we already know who we want to come back to our schools. So we've been seeing what our competition is doing in terms of their marketing and making a program that works for Springford fit with our families. So we've done some direct mailing, we have some emails going out and taking more of a grassroots approach, but I think sometimes that makes it a little bit more personal. I hand addressed every single postcard that went out, which for me, I like doing that. One, I love mail. I love sending it and getting it. So that's nice. But two, I think it makes it more personal to know that somebody is actually taking time to write this to invite you to an event, a webinar, whatever it would be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So, okay. Do you have anything else on your agenda for today?
I mean, I feel like we can talk about budget for hours on end, but I know that we have some other meetings coming up next.
Maybe in a subsequent one of these, we'll dive into that a little more.
Okay. Absolutely. I think we scratched the surface, especially
barely,
of charter and cyber. That can be an entire different episode, which we can schedule now for next month.
Okay.
But
unfortunately,
thank you, Jim,
Erin, yes, you have access to my calendar, so yeah.
I do. I know.
Probably just going to happen, whether I know it or not.
You won't know. You'll come to some meeting and I'll say, okay, recording. But it'll be good. Jim, thanks for coming on. Thanks for making budget fun.
Fun. Wow, I never hear that.
Fun-ish.
It's a dry subject, but
it is.
This.
You livened it up. And especially to be able to take that $180 million budget and scale it down to a process that somebody who doesn't deal in the millions can understand. That's helpful.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Colleen, for coming on, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, sounds good.